For 20 years, the cast of King Kong stayed quiet about what really happened. Then the silence broke. Adrien Brody admitted a regret that left fans stunned. Andy Serkis revealed he was secretly killing himself on screen. Jack Black finally confessed to the plan he had been hiding the whole time. And none of it was the biggest secret Peter Jackson had been carrying for 35 years. The confessions that came 20 years later for 2 full decades. The cast of King Kong stayed mostly quiet about what really happened on that set. Then, in the final weeks of 2025, the silence began to break, and the first crack in the wall came from a man who had been holding his breath for years. Adrien Brody sat down with a reporter for a long-form conversation and said something that left Peter Jackson fans stunned. Before King Kong had ever entered his life, Jackson had offered Brody a role in The Lord of the Rings. Brody had turned it down. Years passed. He buried the memory. Then one quiet evening, long after the trilogy had exploded into cinema history, he walked into a theater with his girlfriend at the time to watch The Fellowship of the Ring. The lights went down. The story began. And when the screen went black at the end and the credits started to roll, she turned to him with an expression he still remembers clearly. She asked him how he could have said no to something that beautiful. He froze in his seat. In that moment, sitting in a dark room next to someone he loved, he felt the weight of a decision he had worked very hard to forget. He said, "I remember feeling so stupid." But after 20 years of thinking about it in private, he had finally made peace with the choice. He explained that he did not believe he would have landed the role of Jack Driscoll in Peter Jackson's King Kong if he had said yes to Middle-earth. Andy Serkis had his own confession waiting for the world. He stood in front of a live audience and looked back at the exact moment Peter Jackson had asked him to play Kong. It happened right after they had wrapped the final scene of The Return of the King. Serkis had just spent 3 films crouching and twisting his body to play a 3.5-foot creature named Gollum. He was exhausted, proud, and ready to go back to being a normal actor playing normal people. Then Jackson walked over with a soft smile on his face and asked a question that would change everything. Serkis remembered it with a laugh that still sounded a little surprised. He said he had been so sure his career was about to go back to conventional characters. Instead, Peter Jackson had just asked him to jump from playing a 3.5-foot creature straight into playing a 25-foot gorilla. The joke had become his entire working life. The retrospective pieces kept arriving throughout the 20th anniversary. One of the most striking came from a writer at Inverse, who finally gave the film the praise it had been denied in 2005. She wrote that the 3-hour runtime had stopped being a problem. For years, critics had attacked the film for being too long, too bloated, too patient. 20 years later, the length was no longer the weakness. It was the reason the movie worked. Every slow minute, every quiet scene, every lingering glance had been building the emotional bond between and in Kong until their friendship felt like something you could reach out and touch. One of the softest reflections came from a man most fans had never even heard of. His name is Greg Broadmoor, and he was a concept artist at Weta Workshop when Kong was being designed. He sat down for an interview with Letterboxd on the 20th anniversary and told the story of how King Kong had saved his career. He had been drawing dinosaurs and robots fighting each other for years before Richard Taylor spotted his portfolio at exactly the right moment. The Kong project was coming up. Taylor needed creature designers. Broadmoor was a dinosaur-obsessed kid who still dreamed about Jurassic Park. Suddenly, he was drawn to monsters that would live inside Skull Island. He said it was a dream of Hi's entire life. Not every look back was sweet, though. The 20th anniversary also brought a cold truth back to the surface. On paper, the movie had earned $556 million around the world, against a budget of $207 million. That should have been called a success. Advertising had cost roughly $60 million more on top of that. Industry insiders had called the opening weekend strong, but disappointing. Universal had been expecting the biggest film in the world. What they got was a film that underperformed their wildest hopes. That quiet disappointment would shape Peter Jackson's career for the next 20 years. None of that, however, explained the strangest secret any actor in the film had carried. A secret Jack Black finally admitted to in a long press interview, years after the cameras had stopped rolling. The secret Jack Black never told anyone when Peter Jackson was casting the role of Carl Denham. Almost nobody in Hollywood thought of Jack Black. Black was a comedy guy. He was the loud guy. He was a man from Tenacious D, the one who had just come off High Fidelity, while School of Rock was about to launch him into another orbit entirely, asking him to play a dark, selfish, obsessive filmmaker who gets people killed for the sake of his art was not the kind of choice anyone expected. But Black had wanted this role for years, and he had wanted it for reasons he had been hiding from everyone around him. During the film's promotional tour, Black finally told the truth to a reporter. He had been chasing Peter Jackson for a very long time. He had called his agent months before anyone had even heard whispers about the Kong project. He told his agent flat out that he wanted to be in a Peter Jackson movie at any cost at all. He said he did not care about the script. He did not care about the role. He would have shown up and auditioned for a cartoon if Jackson had been the one directing it. He smiled as he said it, and then he admitted the deeper truth underneath the joke. He said he just wanted a party with Peter Jackson. That was the goal he had been carrying around in private. When the offer finally arrived, Black had a plan that he believed was brilliant, a plan he was convinced nobody would ever figure out. He was going to base Carl Denham on Peter Jackson himself. Denham was a filmmaker. The character and the director seemed to match each other too perfectly to ignore. So Black decided he would quietly copy Jackson's mannerisms, the rhythms of his voice, his obsessive intensity about his own work. The plan felt like a genius. Then things got complicated very fast. By the time Black actually arrived in New Zealand for pre-production, Peter Jackson had started losing weight. A lot of weight. Black watched his hero shrink in front of his own eyes over the course of a few short weeks. Suddenly, the physical match he had been counting on was gone. He panicked and thought for a moment that he would have to lose weight, too, just to keep the idea alive. He spent the first full week of production following Jackson around the studio, hoping to keep studying him up close. Then he realized something far more important than anything the scale was telling him. The whole plan had been wrong from the very start. Peter Jackson was not the man he had to become for this movie. Jackson was a filmmaker who genuinely cared about his crew. He watched out for his people. He protected them. But Carl Denham was a very different animal entirely. Denham was a user, a liar, a man who would risk the life of every single person around him to get the film he wanted. So Black threw the whole plan out. He started again from scratch. And he reached for a very different source of inspiration. He pulled up old footage of Orson Welles. Not the polished Welles of Citizen Kane, but the wild, reckless, falling down drunk Welles of his later years. Black dug up tapes of Welles slurring his words at parties, shouting at directors, making terrible decisions in public. There was one more secret about Black's role that fans never figured out until much later. The most famous line in the movie, the one that closes the entire film with a kind of broken music, was not originally written for him at all. It was not the airplanes. It was Beauty Killed the Beast. That line had belonged to somebody else in the original plan. It had been written for Fay Wray, the original Indaro from the 1933 film. She was 96 years old when Peter Jackson was making the remake. He had wanted to honor her with a surprise cameo at the very end of the movie, where she would stand over Kong's fallen body in the street and deliver the final words that had defined the original story. Fay Wray said no. Her health was fading. Then, in August of 2004, before filming had even finished, she passed away. The line had nowhere else to go. So Peter Jackson gave it to Jack Black. A moment that had been meant as a quiet tribute to an old screen star became the closing line of a comedian who had been cast against type. While Black was rebuilding his whole approach in the first week of filming, another actor was already deep in a performance so unusual that no one on the crew outside of Peter Jackson fully understood what he was doing. That actor was about to kill himself on camera, and nobody in the audience would notice for 20 long years. The Congolizer and the actor who killed himself when Peter Jackson offered Andy Serkis the role of King Kong, he quietly offered him something extra on the side, something most fans never noticed, even after multiple viewings. Jackson asked Serkis to also play Lumpy the cook. Lumpy was a one-eyed Cockney man who worked on the SS Venture as the ship's cook, its barber, and sometimes its surgeon. He was not Kong. He was a human being in the story. He had his own scenes, his own lines, his own personality, and his own death on the island. When you watch the film carefully, something starts to click. In the scene where Kong shakes a log over the ravine and throws the screaming sailors to their deaths, one of the men he is killing is Lumpy, which means Andy Serkis, playing Kong, was killing Andy Serkis, playing Lumpy. The actor was killing himself on screen in the middle of a major action sequence, and almost no one in the audience ever realized it. The dual role came to Serkis in a very personal way. Right after the final scene of The Return of the King had wrapped, Peter Jackson pulled him aside and gave him a gift. Jackson handed him one of the real prop rings that had been used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was the kind of gift you give somebody when you're saying goodbye to a long chapter together. In the middle of that emotional moment, Jackson asked a question that would change Serkis' life all over again. He asked him if he wanted to play King Kong. Serkis said yes without a second thought. Playing Kong meant much more than just standing on a motion capture stage. Peter Jackson wanted Serkis to be physically present on set with Naomi Watts for every single scene between and in Kong. He wanted Naomi to be able to look into a real pair of human eyes while she was performing. So Serkis put on a gray gorilla muscle suit, covered his face and body in 132 small round markers, and spent weeks climbing up cherry pickers, ladders, and building frames just to position himself inside her eyeline. Peter Jackson later spoke about it with obvious admiration in his voice. He said every single close-up of Naomi in the entire film, without exception, was Naomi actually looking at Andy. She was never staring into empty space. Andy was always there somewhere above her or beside her, suspended from a platform or perched on a box or balanced on a ladder, making sure she had a real pair of eyes to react to. Naomi Watts gave him a nickname on set that the crew started using daily. She called him a ballet dancer on steroids. To make Kong's voice real on set, the sound department built Serkis a custom rig that the crew started calling the Condoleezzer. It was a device that took his voice as he spoke into a microphone, dropped it 3 full octaves in real time, and then broadcast it back through massive speakers mounted around the set. Naomi could hear it echoing off the walls. She could feel it in the floor. On top of that, Serkis wore prosthetic gorilla teeth, real physical dentures shaped like a silverback's jaw that reshaped the way his mouth formed vowels and consonants. Serkis